A prominent Illinois politician changes his stance on same-sex marriage. That's up next on Capitol View. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Capitol View, the show where we talk about Illinois government and politics. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn with Illinois Issues Magazine, and with me this week is Patrick Yeagle with Illinois Times. Pat, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Christopher Mooney, professor of political science with the Institute of Government and Political Affairs at the University of Illinois. Professor, thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So we saw Senator Mark Kirk change his stance on same-sex marriage this week. We're not expecting a vote in the Senate at any point in the U.S. Senate on this issue, but a lot of folks are kind of trying to square up where they stand in the wake of the Supreme Court taking up the issue last week. Pat, you know, we've seen other people kind of shift on this. Most notably, President Barack Obama said he evolved. He was for civil unions. Now he's for same-sex marriage. What kind of message does this send to people? It seemed to be kind of a big deal this week, but it's sort of a slow news week as well. How big of a deal is this?
Coming from Mark Kirk, I don't think anybody would say that it's a huge deal, simply because he doesn't really have a whole, very big stake in how this issue goes. But the fact that he is an elected public official, at a pretty high level from Illinois, I think it sends the message to the base that, your beliefs may be this, but the rest of public opinion is going this way, and if we want to get any sort of votes in the future, we need to start, being more realistic about, about our platform, essentially. So.
Well, Kirk is known as a moderate Republican. A lot of people feel like that helped him win his race when he ran for the Senate. He said, I just want to read his quote here because it was kind of interesting. Same-sex couples should have the right to civil marriage. Our time on earth is limited. I know that better than most. Life comes down to who you love and who loves you back. Government has no place in the middle. As we know, Senator Kirk went through a pretty harrowing experience. He had a stroke recently. Chris, how much of this do you think is coming from personal experience, and how much is it maybe reading those political winds as we see folks kind of coming around to this idea?
Well, maybe that is his personal experience, that he's read the tea leaves. Who knows what he is thinking in general. I mean, as Pat pointed out, it's politically wise of him to do this. He's undoubtedly, other than maybe Senator from Maine, the most moderate, so to speak, Republican in the Senate, and he needs to be that way to represent his constituency. That's the way he could, if he's got any chance of ever getting reelected in the state or doing something else in the state of Illinois, he's going to do that. But what's interesting about this particular case, in particular in light of what's been going on in D.C. Lately, there was just a couple weeks ago, Senator Rob Portman, official in the Bush administration, Ohio senator, definitely a hardline conservative guy, comes out and says, look, I'm for gay marriage. Why? Because my son told me he's gay, and I love my son, and now I think that he ought to have the opportunity to get married and share his life with somebody in a legal sense. And that we've seen in Republicans in a couple of other situations. I think Newt Gingrich, for example, his sister is gay or his daughter is gay, and of course, most famously, former Vice President Dick Cheney, one of the most hardline conservatives you're ever going to meet in public office. But his daughter is gay, so he's good on gay issues, right? Senator Kirk is the first one that I'm aware of, at least in the high-profile office, that has no personal stake in this. And a lot of people in the sort of pro same-sex marriage advocacy community see this. See the sort of conversions when your son tells you he's gay, and oh my God, the scales fall from my eyes. That's sort of it's disingenuous in a way, and it's like, look, everybody is somebody's son or daughter, right? And so I think this is whether there's going to be a rush toward the door in the Republican caucus in the Senate on this issue because of Mark Kirk, I doubt it, but it is a significant different kind of position to be taken by a Republican, I think, at this level.
Yeah. It's kind of ironic in this instance. You mentioned his quote where it says, government has no place in this. That's actually kind of almost a Tea Party approach, to an issue being, a social issue, does the government need to be involved in that? And so that may even spur, kind of a different approach to social issues in general. Maybe not all of them, probably not abortion, I'm sure, but a lot of issues like that where the government has been involved in something that arguably maybe they shouldn't be.
Yeah, more purist libertarian view on the issue.
I wonder what Rand Paul's got to say about this, for example. He's the sort of torchbearer for that at the moment. Now that his dad's retired, so. Yeah, I'm not sure how that. I don't think. I'm certain he hasn't come out in favor of same-sex marriage, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility this could occur, because it's looked like this. We mentioned the Supreme Court cases. I mean, pundits and court watchers suggest that it looks like from the questioning, though that's often predictions about what the court's going to do are dangerous to make. But
since the Affordable Care Act, I'm really afraid to ever listen to this.
Yes, right, exactly. But the pundits, the court watchers are saying that it look like DOMA is in trouble, and that's the Defense of Marriage Act, a federal piece of legislation passed in 1996 and signed by Bill Clinton, bipartisan support, and basically in light of certain state-level actions in the early 90s that really got this thing going in Hawaii and Vermont and Massachusetts, before same-sex marriage was even thought within the realm of mainstream political thought. In fact, frankly, this is one of the most interesting public policy areas I've ever observed, and changed with lightning speed. 20 years ago, even gay rights activists were opposed to this because they thought it was a bridge too far, and they thought it would alienate. So they were more, let's go slow, let's take it easy step by step. But things have changed, especially in the last, it's sort of exponentially increased in terms of public support in the last couple of years. Whether or not that continues to be the case in the future, I guess we'll see. But it's really pretty amazing.
Well, and Chris, I think you make an interesting point about Kirk. He has in the past, like when he decided to run for Senate, switched his stance on issues or altered stances, saying that he was trying to best represent his constituency. So if he was going to represent a statewide constituency, he changed some of his stances on things such as cap and trade and other issues. What about the demographics of the state maybe gives him the flexibility to do something like this?
Well, Illinois is primarily, it's more loaded in the demographics that favor the Democrats, in particular. Statewide, on a statewide basis, certainly it was a very diverse state, lots of pockets of different policy positions. But, the sort of swing voter in the state, we always say the swing voter in the statewide election is the female living in the suburbs, right, who is economically conservative but socially liberal. And that's the wheelhouse on this issue. These are people who will
kind of who we used to call the soccer mom, maybe.
Right. Yes. And but she's probably more likely to have a job or two as well as taking the kids to soccer. So that's a group. And also, the Democratic Party is certainly split on this, and we see this in the General Assembly. That there are, where you have maybe some suburban Republicans who would be supporting this in the General Assembly, but you also have staunch Democratic constituencies who will be opposing it, either whether it be downstate because they're socially conservative, or among the black community because they have certain, position difficulty with this issue in particular.
Well, we saw kind of a fluke situation in the Senate. It was actually only one downstate Republican who voted for the bill when it went through the Senate. But in the House, maybe we could see some more smaller districts. We could see some more Republicans in the suburbs maybe come on board to this, or?
I think it's possible, but it depends on the politics of the situation. The leaders are going to have some say in this. Do they want to present a united front on this? Do the Republicans want to present a united front on this? And that'll be it. But I think that they won't. I think they see the writing on the wall. It seems like things are moving. It's not a bread and butter issue. It's going to alienate people that that are in favor of it, and the people that are against it. Is it going to alienate them in these small pockets? It looks like less and less so. So. They're having to make some interesting political calculations on this right now, yeah.
But while we're seeing some public sentiment shift on this issue, the bill that would legalize same-sex marriage in Illinois is held up in the House. Speaker Michael Madigan has said that the votes simply aren't there yet. So why are we seeing kind of this disconnect in the House? I think folks thought that the Democrats could get this through. What's some of the holdup here?
I'd probably just say exactly what he said about downstate Democrats and some of the the Chicago black Democrats are not reliably in favor of same-sex marriage, and so the votes that they you might think just because this is put forward by a Democrat and this is kind of a Democrat pet issue that those votes would be there, but they're just simply not. So.
Well, and we're seeing some tradition and religion come into
Sure,
play here
absolutely.
as well, right? Especially with some of the black Democrats, maybe they have church leaders back home who are not as much in favor of this, as well as the downstate Democrats who may have leaders in the faith community who have some issues here.
That's very true, and that's true on a number of social issues that are these sort of moral issues, abortion, gambling to some extent, alcohol control, where people forget. They think African Americans are the most reliably Democratic vote, individual voters of any demographic group in the country, but many they have a high percentage of fundamentalist Protestant people in that group, and they have they have sometimes those groups, especially like say the ministers and the groups that those people in those religions will have a different slant than, say, the liberal Democrat from the north side of Chicago or something like that.
Well, and that's not to paint it with too broad a brush. We have seen plenty of religious leaders come to the State House and speak in favor of this issue. We've seen members of the black faith community as well come and speak in favor of the issue. But in a lot of cases, we're also seeing opposition in those same pockets. So I'd like to move on to some other issues that we're going to see come up when lawmakers return. They are still on their spring break this week, but they'll be back next week and kind of hitting the ground running with lots of issues before them. We're still rolling on this gun control and pensions train. We're going to probably hear a lot more debate over that. We've seen President Barack Obama push some gun control issues this week. We're also seeing in national polling that folks are maybe losing some of their appetite for gun control. Professor Mooney, have we lost the opportunity, or have those who would like to see gun control in Illinois maybe lost the opportunity to strike on this, or are we still going to see some potential for some change this session?
Gun control is such an interesting issue. The problem is if you're interested in restricting gun ownership or usage or whatever any aspect of restriction of gun use, you are going to be facing one of the most single-minded, well-organized, broad-based interest groups in politics today, and that's whether it's NRA or the IRA or those groups of that nature. There's an economic component to that. There's a lot of money in guns. There's they sell a lot of them. A lot of ammunition gets sold, and so it's very difficult to find a group that's focused with a sort of diffuse concern of a broad mass. And what happens is, we've seen it play out, dozens of times over the last couple of decades, mass murder, oh my God, ain't it awful, killed some kids, killed some old ladies, whatever. And
not to brush it off, but we
should do this, so let's change it, and then boom, we forget about it, and we move on, and then there's the next horrible tragedy, and then we do it all again. It's almost a script that gets played out. Because of that, perhaps, the powers that be in the General Assembly, who don't necessarily see this as a political winner, and they don't want to alienate the Democrats, don't want to alienate the downstate Democrats, for one thing. They may just, why bother? Some argue that Barack Obama is not pushing it that hard. It's like, he's going to pay lip service. He goes out to Colorado, he goes out to Connecticut, he makes some speeches, it looks good on TV, but is he really pushing with political clout? Or is he saving his, keeping his powder dry for issues that he is more interested in? That's something you hear sometimes in the news.
But we see a state like Colorado that just passed some sweeping restrictions. Probably not an easy thing to do there. I'm sure there's major opposition to that. There's definitely large pockets of libertarianism in Colorado. Why don't we see something like that gaining traction here as opposed to another large state that is able to pull that off?
Well, maybe that will happen when we get 27 people shot down in a multiplex in Springfield someday.
Well, that's a really sad way of putting a point on it, but yeah, I mean, that is the difference between us and Colorado, for sure. What we will probably see this session is a push to restrict concealed carry. Pat, we've got a deadline set by a court. I know we've talked about this before, but I just want to catch people up. Will you give us the rundown of kind of why folks are thinking that lawmakers will do something with concealed carry this session?
The federal court said Illinois' law is unconstitutional. You have to allow some form of concealed carry. So go back and pass a law that conforms to to our interpretation of the Second Amendment. And so the lawmakers have until early June, I believe, to pass something that that allows concealed carry in some form. The justices didn't say what form they had to pass it in. So it could still be very broad and say everybody can carry all the time, or it could be much more narrow where you can carry from your door to your car, and then you can carry until you get to the threshold of a business, and then at that business you can't carry anymore. So, I mean, they could restrict it to the point where it's impractical and cumbersome. So.
Well, we've seen some test votes in the House on some of these restrictions. I think we're still a ways off from seeing a final piece of legislation. Meanwhile, the Senate's kind of working on it in a more traditional fashion behind closed doors. So we've got some time before we probably see a final bill on that. But Pat, there's another issue that's been kind of swirling lately that's been around before, coming back again, the issue of hydraulic fracturing. Pat, you had a story on this recently. Can you fill us in on what's going on this session with fracking?
Yeah, just a little quick background. Basically, what they do with hydraulic fracturing is they take about 2 to 4 million gallons of water, sand, and chemicals, and they pump it underground into shale rock. In Illinois, it's about 5,000 feet deep or so, and the liquid goes in there and it fractures the rock, and then the sand flows in and it keeps the rock open so that oil and gas, mostly gas in this case, can rush out and come up to the surface. So it's basically a way of creating, getting to a lot of resources that were were just not economically viable previously. But the problem with it is, at least from the environmental side, is that it creates a lot of nasty waste when that water and other contaminants come up. And there are a lot of concerns about the chemicals and other stuff seeping into groundwater. So.
Now, this process is something that we've seen in Illinois for a long time. Fracking itself, it's the horizontal component of it that folks are really concerned about, right? Is the idea that it will go for miles underground, you go down, and then you'll go out. So, I mean, what is some of the worry when we're seeing such a larger scale project?
Right.
Like
Scale is exactly it. You nailed it on the head with that. We previously have done vertical fracking where they drill straight down, and at the end of that pipe, they just do a little bit here, and that sucks up the oil that's in that immediate vicinity. The difference is that now they can shoot a pipe horizontally underground for as much as a mile, maybe even further. And then they can reach stuff that, if I am a landowner and you're a landowner and you're right next door to me, I could take the oil out from underneath your place as well. And I could be, putting toxic chemicals under your land, and, according to the environmental folks, I could, ruin your well, and meanwhile my stuff is fine because I, took it from under your side. There's a lot of issues about should I be able to take the oil that's underneath your property? There's a term called forced pooling, and it hasn't really been addressed in the legislation in Illinois, and I don't know if it will be until a court case comes up about it. So I guess we'll just have to see. But there's still a lot of issues that need to be hammered out, and there's ironically one of the issues that is holding it up is not really even related to the process itself. It's about getting local jobs on these fracking sites, and so until that gets resolved, it's kind of at a standstill.
Yeah, we saw a lot of the other issues around this kind of meet a resolution this year. There's a lot of environmental groups who are saying, yes, we'd like a moratorium on fracking, but we recognize that that's probably not going to happen. So they've gotten on board with this bill that they are saying is some of the strictest regulations in the nation. Pat, I mean, does that prove out with this legislation? Is this something that's quite strict compared to what other states have done?
It appears to, at least to my eyes, and keep in mind I'm not an expert on this by any means, but
You just play one on TV because you're a journalist.
Well, the restrictions are very thorough, at least in my estimation. It requires them to disclose the toxic chemicals that they shoot underground, and that is something that they're actually exempt from at the federal level. They don't have to do that on the federal level. So,
although we've seen a lot of voluntary
absolutely. So that requires them to test wells, to test drinking water wells before and after they frack to make sure that nothing happened with those wells. If they did end up doing something, then they have to replace or repair those wells. If they basically, if you're a landowner and you think something has happened to your land, you can request an investigation be opened by the Department of Natural Resources and EPA. And so it does have a lot of restrictions, and it puts a lot of, I don't know if burden is the right word, but it puts a lot of restrictions on how it can be done, and actually it even goes down to the types of fittings that they can use on the fracking wells themselves, and the types of pumps and all this stuff. It's very thorough and precise in what they're doing. There are a couple of problems, though. Some people don't trust the Department of Natural Resources to be objective when they're investigating a fracking accident, or if you want to whatever you might call it.
Fraccident.
A fraccident, right, exactly. That's the term that's kind of been adopted by the opposition. There's also, as we mentioned before, the issue of forced pooling. Should you be forced to essentially take part simply because you're a landowner in proximity to someone else who has leased their land? There's a lot of issues like that that are kind of, they're not main issues, but they're kind of the things where when you pass a law, if you don't look at every single little detail, it can end up causing a lot of side problems that you didn't anticipate.
Things that we might see play out in court eventually.
Exactly.
And I've heard some concerns over, seeing DNR regulate this as well. It's just that they're quite short-staffed,
sure,
and they've been cut
sure,
in recent years. So there's some worry about that, but there's also fees built into the bill to help them get some new staff. Mm-hmm. So, we'll see how this plays out. I think this is one of those issues where there are going to be folks who are going to be nervous about this, be uncomfortable with this, no matter what happens on the state level, correct?
Definitely, absolutely. And we've seen in a lot of other states that have done this, they have made a lot of money. Texas, I think, made $1.5 billion from it last year, and Illinois could really use that money. But on the flip side, it comes, at the potential cost of, a series of environmental catastrophes everywhere. So it's a judgment call on the part of the legislature. Do we want to take this risk? Is it worth the reward? And can we mitigate the risks, even though we don't necessarily know what the risks are at this point, because there hasn't really been a full study of the safety of this.
And it's not just the revenue for the state,
absolutely,
but the economic development. It is part of the state that needs economic development very badly. Generally, when you get this much money involved in a public policy issue, dollar signs, potential money. Now, we don't even know if this is going to be the next North Dakota.
Absolutely.
But the potential is there, and of course, boosters will suggest that it is. When there's that much money involved, it's going to happen one way or the other. And, I think that the environmentalists are just going to have to try to mitigate the harm, and this is why we see them on board with this.
Well, I think you make a good point. We're just to the phase where people are drilling test wells to try to figure out what's down there, but at the same time, these energy companies probably wouldn't be spending millions of dollars buying up the rights if they didn't think that there was a good chance that they could make a solid profit off of this.
Keep in mind, everybody's that I've talked to has said it's actually legal right now. If you had the resources, you could go outside and lease this land right next to us and frack a well right now. And the only thing that would be stopping you is getting a permit from DNR, and they might even be happy to give it to you if you ask nicely enough. So there's really nothing actually technically stopping that from happening currently. So.
But Pat, you tried to find a well where someone was doing this.
Yeah.
Weren't able to find one as of yet.
Unfortunately, right? Everybody that I basically called a lot of oil companies in Southern Illinois trying to find somebody. They said either the ground was still frozen when I was doing my research, or it was too muddy. So it depends on when you call, but it really was just basically out of season.
Yeah,
so.
And the other thing that we've heard is that without regulation, there's some hesitancy to set up these huge operations, and then maybe they'll see regulation come in that would make them have to make some expensive changes in the future, right?
Basically, the way it might play out is, say you go out and frack one of your wells. Right now, DNR doesn't have clear guidelines on how to regulate that. So if they decide that that you've done it wrong, even though there's no clear guidelines, you could face major fines, and this could drag on through court forever. And it's a lot. Basically, the phrase that I've kind of adopted for this is that it's easier to ask permission than to ask forgiveness in this case.
So it's easier for them to try to have a rubric to work under
Exactly.
instead of trying to go ahead and do something
Exactly.
that would be quite costly,
Right.
and then maybe have to go back and fix things
Exactly.
later on once the state makes up its mind on
Yeah.
the issue. All right. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it at that for this week. We got a lot of issues coming up next week. Of course, we'll be looking at probably pension reform and gun control as well. So make sure to tune in next week. The legislature will be back in session, so we'll have plenty to discuss. I'd like to thank my guests, Pat Yeagle and Chris Mooney, for coming on this week. And thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn with Illinois Issues, and we'll see you next week on Capitol View.